Everything is go. We are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Spiritual Business Spotlight. I'm really excited today to introduce a new guest. I don't know if I'm right or left, but hi, Lori Lambert Williams. Welcome to the show.
Sue, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. This is really exciting. I like the idea of spiritual business spotlight. That sounds so great. I want to find out more.
Oh, I'm all like, we want to find out more about you. So basically, what I do is I talk to people like yourself who are working in spirituality in really interesting modalities, energy healing, the work that you do, which is controlled remote viewing, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, healers and psychics and mediums and all sorts of people who dance on that little edge of this world or the next world or what we're capable of that we're not even aware of being capable of doing.
That is so true. That's my passion actually. I really believe that consciousness is the final frontier. And
Mm,
because of that, I mean, we've explored space, not of course just a tiny bit, but we've explored a lot of space. We actually know more about the moon than we do about consciousness. We know more about the ocean than we do about consciousness. So consciousness to me is the final frontier. And that's what all of these arts that you just mentioned explore. We're using our consciousness to explore and going beyond the limits of what most people think is human capacity, right? We're going way beyond that and finding out that humans truly are limitless in our capacity to connect with each other, to get information that is not readily available through what we call normal means. So that's what led me into controlled remote viewing and why I'm so passionate about it. They say if you can simply convince 1% of the population or introduce 1% of the population to an idea and get them to buy into it, that you'll have critical mass. So my idea is, what if we could reach 1% of the world's population and help them discover their own potential? Then we could have critical mass to raise the consciousness of the entire planet.
wow. Only 1%.
Only 1%.
Wow. And that is exciting and optimistic as well, because especially right now with everything that's going on in the world, financially, with resources, with the earth herself, and
Yeah.
with people, I really think that there's a, such a chance for us to reconnect with one another because everything has been so micro separated into our own little houses with the lockdowns and everything. And
Yes.
then, but with the work that you do and the work that I do in some ways too, there's a connection there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, we can connect with people. I mean, how many people that are probably listening to your show right now have had the experience of connecting psychically or remotely with another human? Most of us have.
Right.
My husband and I, before we met, we were having dreams about each other. We were literally dreaming about each other, and we hadn't met yet. And so many things happened that kind of led us to meet and recognize each other, and it was really quite amazing. And so you think, okay, how am I connecting with this person? And when we first started dating, I could literally hear his thoughts in my head. And now you might say it's easy to get into self-delusion where we think, I hear his thoughts in my head. But then if we don't get solid feedback, we could easily be kidding ourselves, right? So there was a moment at which we were dating, and we'd been seeing a lot of each other, and we just wanted to be together all the time. And we were talking about when we were going to see each other next, and I could hear him planning on buying me a Valentine's gift. So he said, "Well, I can't see you tomorrow," but I could hear his thoughts, and in his voice in my head, and he was thinking, well, "I'm going to go. I'm going to tell her I can't see her because I want to go buy her a Valentine's gift." And I was afraid that if I if I said, "Hey, did you just have this thought?" And he did, that he would be really freaked out and wouldn't want to see me again. I don't think most men want to have a woman that can read their thoughts, right? So I said, you know, I once heard a story about this little girl who just loved her daddy so much, and he just adored her, and they loved spending time together. And every evening he'd have her on his lap in front of the fire and tell her stories, and they would just have such a great time together. And it was like their treasured time. And then as it was nearing Christmas, she decided she wanted to knit him some bedroom slippers as a surprise. So she started staying in her room in the evenings and telling him she couldn't come out and she had to do something, and because she really wanted to make this a special gift and surprise him. But he would have much rather had her time and spend that time with her than to have the bedroom slippers. And so I told him the story, and he's thinking to himself, he tells me later, he's thinking, she's reading my thoughts. She knows what I'm thinking. And it really did kind of freak him out. He kind of thought, well, gee, how do I like that? How's that going to work? So,
I can imagine.
Yeah. So it was, but but that makes me think, when they talk about schools of fish, I love studying quantum theory, because I feel like quantum theory completely explains why we have successful mediums and psychics and healers and remote viewers, and why it works. If you think about schools of fish that all move in unison, flocks of birds that are all going in the same direction, and how they can even separate these photons of light and have them react the same, even though they're miles apart, they're still connected with each other. And so, I feel like, wow, we are connected. That's why we have precognitive dreams, and that's why we see events before they happen, or why we connect with other people, or even able to connect with past loved ones and tell people about what happened to them, or what the mystery is that they want to know.
Yeah, that's always so beautiful. It's like, it's such a when we connect with the loved ones who have passed on, it's just usually so much validation and calming for the soul. And you had psychic experiences, though, throughout your life. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, I've had psychic experiences my whole life. I didn't realize that they were anything out of the ordinary. Actually, I kind of thought, oh yeah, this probably happens to everybody. And I didn't have a clue that it didn't until I was reading a book back in 1996. I had just started a new job working as the head of a refugee resettlement program. And I was reading a book about research that was done with children who had clinically died and been revived, and their near-death stories, their experiences while they were dead. And they studied these children for 20 years. And they found that as they grew up, these children that had died and had these extraordinary experiences, that as they grew up, they had, they said they had more than normal amount of psychic ability, and that normal was considered one verifiable psychic experience per lifetime, with verifiable meaning something happens, you tell someone else, and then it comes true, for example. So it's, someone else heard it before it came true, and can verify that you did get that information prior to the event happening. That's a verifiable experience. But when I read that, I was shocked. I was like, one verifiable experience per lifetime is normal? And that's when it hit me that I wasn't normal. And also, my mother had only recently, before this happened, had only recently told me about an experience when I was a baby where I clinically died and was revived. I didn't even know, I didn't remember it, but I thought, oh, well, maybe I had a near-death experience that I don't recall, but it is interesting that was in my past. And I fought it for a really long time. I didn't fight the psychic experiences because I considered them normal and part of who I was. But what I did fight was mediumship. I didn't want to think that I might be talking to dead people. And I had been a missionary, for 20 years, a Christian missionary. And there's a fine line between hearing the voice of the Lord and communing with the devil, right?
Right.
And it all depends on semantics and the language you use, whether you're like, If you had a precognitive dream warning you, for example, that someone might have cancer, a friend of yours or a loved one, you'd want to tell them, but if depending on their background and their belief systems, you don't want to just go barging in and saying, hey, I had a psychic intuition that you are, you're going to die or you have a tumor or whatever. You want to go in and reach them on their level. And if that would freak them out, you could say, I had a dream about you the other night, and it kind of worried me because in the dream, you had something wrong with your whatever. You might want to go get that checked out. Just to make me feel better. Go get it checked out. Or something along those lines. You'd want to be careful how you presented that to them, so that you didn't scare them. And some people would even be more comfortable with, I had a word from the Lord the other day. That sort of thing. And so I found that I had to be careful how I presented when I would get information, how I presented that to others, that was a really important thing to consider.
Oh, I can imagine. And I think you and I grew up kind of probably in the same era where, and I grew up in the Bible Belt too of America. So it was very like, there was an opening for the coolness of it and the uniqueness of it, but there was also that fear, like, who are you speaking with and who's giving you these messages? Even today, I think there are some people. And then you also have like, one of my senses is audio. And
Mhm.
I have had like audio hallucinations, like big booming voices telling me things, and so some people would say, "Wow, you need to go get that checked out," um,
They
and
would immediately label you as schizophrenic.
right, right, exactly, because we've been taught that that's what that is, and if you open yourself up to having experiences in a way, then but this is something that they've been studying kind of on the side in a lot of places that we perhaps are starting to learn about due to pop culture.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So you have some experience with that, don't you? Uh,
Well, it was specific, meaning hearing voices.
No, with the, military side of things, like
Oh,
with I'm thinking of Stranger Things, how they did, and I don't know if you've ever watched the series Stranger Things.
I saw a few episodes in the first season, but
Uh-huh.
I don't get much time to watch a lot of television or shows. So we try to aim for one movie a week on Friday nights. Friday
Okay,
night,
I'm sorry.
night. I am familiar with the premise of the show. One thing that happened to me was because I had been a missionary and I at the same time had continual psychic experiences. And then as I began to realize that people around me were not having the kind of experiences that I was on a regular basis, where I just suddenly knew things, for example, claircognizance, or when I would suddenly feel things in my body that would warn me or whatever, that was clairsentience. And then also, I would literally have visions that saved my life on a number of occasions, and some of the
Oh.
times the lives of others. That's clairvoyance, right? And then
Mhm.
I also would hear sometimes booming voices that would make me jump out of my chair, and I'd look around and realize no one else heard that. So that's a clairaudience, right? So I would have these things happen, and when I became aware that not everyone was like that and wasn't having those experiences, it made me want to seek out understanding of what was happening and how that fit into my belief system at the time. Because my belief system was at the time was pretty black and white. It was pretty binary, with God and the God up in heaven and the devil in hell and, good and evil. And just everything was pretty black and white. And there wasn't a lot of gray there for me. And I didn't really like to think outside my belief system. Like I didn't want to think about UFOs because I didn't understand how did that fit in. I didn't want to think about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or and the idea of interdimensional beings never even, I mean, that wasn't even part of my my vocabulary. If somebody said, well, have you had any encounters with interdimensional beings? I'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. so so I was a very different person then. But yet I knew there was more and I wanted to explore it. And when I stopped the missionary lifestyle and came back to the States and got this job as the head of a refugee resettlement program, I was invited to go to the Spring Institute in Denver, Colorado, to attend a conference on post-traumatic stress disorder in refugees and secondary post-traumatic stress disorder from people who work with refugees and hear their stories all the time. See, that shows you how we can take on people's stuff, right?
Right.
And so I'm attending this conference the first day. And meanwhile, I was reading this book about the research with the kids who had had OBEs. And so I'm attending the conference, and there was this fascinating speaker. He was such a good speaker. And he was a psychologist, and he was a recently retired colonel from the military. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I just met my very first colonel ever 3 days ago when I started this new job. On the day that I started the new job, this colonel shows up. And unbeknownst to me, he was with the CIA, and he had been assigned to get really close to me so that he could keep an eye on the newest refugees coming into the country, because the day I began that job was the day they decided to allow Kurds into the United States, Kurdish refugees into the United States for the first time. So they really wanted to keep an eye on them because they thought, well, Saddam Hussein could slip, somebody in here.
Right.
So suddenly I meet this colonel, and then 3 days later I'm at the Spring Institute, and this fascinating man is talking, and he's a recently retired colonel. And so I was fascinated with everything he talked about. And then that night when I went to sleep, I dreamt that I met this colonel that had been talking at the conference. And I said, oh my gosh, I just met my first colonel the other day. And I was telling him in the dream about this other colonel. So I get up early the next morning, and I show up early at the conference, and I'm standing outside the locked ballroom doors waiting for them to open. And up walks this speaker, this psychologist, retired colonel. And he's standing there. So we're standing there in uncomfortable silence. And then I looked at him and said, I had a dream about you last night. My mother always told me, hey, if you want a man to remember you, just tell him you had a dream about him.
Right.
So I'm standing there, and he says, really, what did you dream? And I said, well, and then I told him about the dream. And then he said, what branch of the military is this colonel that you met in? And I said, I don't know, because I know nothing about the military. I said, I don't know, but I think it was military intelligence. And he said, oh, that's interesting. I was in military intelligence. And right as he said that to me, this cover of a book that I had not bought, but that I had seen on the new arrival bookshelf at the bookstore had flashed in my mind. And it was turquoise and black. And I just would blurt it out. And I was just like, oh my gosh, have you seen that new book? And he's like, what new book? And I said, it's turquoise and black, and it has something to do with psychics in the military. And he said, are you talking about A Psychic Warrior by David Morehouse? And I said, that's the book. Because all I had done was picked it up and read the inside jacket. I didn't buy the book. And so he's like, I can't believe you're asking me about that book. He said, I was the head of the psychology part of that program for 20 years. I was the guy who vetted the men they wanted to put in the unit. And
wow.
And so then he was suddenly very interested in talking to me. And he starts kind of leaning in, into my space, and wow, do you have a photographic memory for numbers? Do you remember maps easily? Are you artistic? And he just starts asking me these questions, and I'm just like, and I'm having visions of men in black kidnapping me.
Right. Totally.
I really did have a lot of fears. The fear kind of ruled my life back then. Thankfully, it doesn't anymore. But back then, it really did. And so I was kind of edging away from him. And so as he realizes that I'm kind of trying to escape, he finally says, hey, when you get home, and this was 1996, so the internet was still a little bit new, but he's like, when you get home, go online and look up controlled remote viewing. So I said, okay. And so when I got home, the first thing I did was look up controlled remote viewing, and up popped this beautiful website. It was kind of elementary, but it was beautiful in the sense that I had this sense in my body and my mind, like, eureka, at last, I've found the answer. And what it said was, what is CRV? And then it said controlled remote viewing. And then it explained that all of us humans are born with an innate knowing. We have intuition, all of us do. We're born with it. It's part of Oog and Og and the primeval forest. When they're walking through the forest and they hear a twig snap behind them, and Oog turns around and says, what was that? And Og, meanwhile, is running as fast as he can, saying saber-toothed tiger, without having looked behind him. That's that's it's part of our innate nature to keep us alive. And
Right.
so as I read this, it just kind of all the fear about this being like weird and freaky and I'm a freak just sort of fell away and it went like, no, no, this is as normal as your eyesight. It's as normal as your hearing. There's nothing wrong with it. And then it was like, oh, cool. And I just went, this is it. This is what I found. So I wrote him an email there with a lot of trepidation because, back then it was very scary. You're not supposed to write to people you don't know on the internet because they could be kidnappers or bad people. So I wrote to him and I said, do you think I could learn this? And I wrote a little letter and he wrote back this beautiful response. His name was Lynn Buchanan. Lynn is 83 now. Back then he was probably, I think, 54 at the time. And I was 39. And it just so happened that 2 weeks later, I was going to be 40 miles from his house in Maryland. And so I said, well, I have to come to Maryland next week. And he said, oh, great. Well, maybe we could meet you and we'd love to meet with you and talk with you. So long story short, I went to their house. He gave me instructions how to get to his house in Maryland. And I ended up staying there for 5 hours. And we just talked and it was so fun. And I just felt like I'd met a kindred spirit. The hilarious thing though, is that he and his wife were both in the room. She was pretty quiet the whole time. She was kind of behind her laptop working and she didn't really talk much, but he and I just were kind of talking together. And I told him I was 39 and that I had 7 children and that I had my oldest daughter had just had a baby and she and her husband were living with us with our grandson. And so we had this conversation that went on for 5 hours. And then when I found out years later that when I left, his wife looked at him and said, Lynn, you've just got to stop inviting these crazy people to our house.
Oh gosh.
And I said, well, why? And Linda had become like a mother to me. We were just so close. And I said, why did Linda say that she thought I was crazy? He said, we both thought you were crazy. He said, we thought you were crazy because you looked like you were early 20s, maybe 22, 25 at the most. And he said, and here you are talking about your 7 children and your grandbaby. And we're like, that poor girl and her imaginary family. So it was kind of an auspicious beginning, but they ended up becoming like second parents to me, really. I mean, just I could turn to them for anything, and they were so wonderful. When I told them that I was getting divorced and I was kind of in a bad spot, they said, come stay with us. We'll give you money. We'll take care of you. I did not take them up on the offer because I just felt like I couldn't take advantage of them that way. But I was so touched that they were so immediately willing to take me in and take care of me. And then by this time, this was 2001. And Lynn said, well, I'm going to turn over all the basic students in the United States to all the basic students who come to me. I'm going to let you teach them. And I had been studying really intensely with him since 1997. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so he said, I think you're ready to start teaching and I'm going to turn over all these basic students to you. And so I felt like he just handed me a big piece of his pie that he could have used. He didn't have to do that. And he didn't have to share that piece of the pie with me at all. And he did it just truly out of kindness. And so anyway, can't say enough about how wonderful Lynn has been and what a blessing he's been in my life. And it's definitely, I wouldn't be sitting here today talking to you about controlled remote viewing if it were not for his generosity. But anyway, so it's been a very interesting journey. And I remember the first time that I had something happen in a remote viewing session that caused me to really start questioning my belief system. And what happened was that I was asked to view a target that I had no idea. We're always blind to the target, Sue. So we try to keep the viewers where they don't even know what they're viewing. Because if I were to tell you, for example, Sue, the target is a criminal, describe the target. Well, the minute you think the word criminal, you're thinking, oh my gosh, male, dark, ethnic, dangerous, armed, large, threatening, drug addicted. You've got all these stereotypes maybe in your mind connected to what a criminal is to you, that you might not even realize they're there. They might be subconscious connections. But what if the criminal in this case was the little old lady who's worked for the company for 50 years and has been embezzling the whole time,
Right.
we often jump to conclusions. And so in order to avoid that type of pollution getting to the viewer, we want to keep things totally clean. And it's just easier if the viewer doesn't know much about the target. So we might say, let's say that in the case of a criminal trying to get a description of a criminal, instead of saying the target is a criminal, we could just say the target is a person, describe the target. And that way it takes all that pollution away, because it could be
Right.
anybody. Or if, let's say that the police need to know where the kidnapped child will be found, then the target is a location, describe the target. We can keep things very generic so that we don't lead the viewer astray with their own subconscious stereotypes. Because the minute you hear the word kidnapped child, your imagination is going to go wild, right?
Right.
So in this case, I was tasked with a target, and I was actually tasked by the head of MUFON in a certain state. I won't say what the name of the state was, but it was in a certain state, the head of MUFON for that state. And MUFON is the Mutual UFO Network, for those who are not familiar with MUFON. It's an organization that really does scientific research on UFO sightings to determine whether they truly are a UFO sighting or if it's something else, an air balloon, whatever. And so they find actually that about 95% of their investigations turn up to be, it could be easily something that is not UFO or UAP related, but 5% are completely inexplicable.
Huh.
And so there was an incident that happened back in the 50s. It's known as the Kinross incident, and you can
Okay.
actually Google that, and you'll see it on Google. But and what happened was they had the Air Force in Madison, Wisconsin, found this blip on the radar that they didn't know what it was. So they scrambled a jet with two guys flying, and it was nighttime. I believe it was November. It was raining, and this jet that was really cool looking. It was a silver jet with like black sharks on it or something, black stripes that look like a shark on each side. Anyway, so this jet takes off to go intercept whatever this blip is. So they're watching on the radar, and they're watching as the plane is approaching the blip, and then they join, and everything disappears. Everything disappears. There's no debris. There's nothing. And I think they scrambled a secondary jet to go find the first one, and I think that one disappeared too, if I recall correctly. And
Okay.
take that with a grain of salt, because I haven't looked it up recently, but I believe the second one also disappeared. Anyway, so this was my target, and my job was to describe what happened and then what actually happened at the point of them merging. So I'm doing this target, and I described the plane, and I drew the plane, with the black marks on it and everything. And I was seeing this plane had some kind of interaction with another thing that I considered possibly man-made. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it was a big object in the sky and that they had somehow merged. And that I now perceived them in the bottom of a trench underwater, because all of this happened over the Great Lakes.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, but then when I went into the whatever we call this, and we call them man-mades, but when I went into this other vehicle or other man-made thing, I found it to be like a spaceship. I felt like I was standing inside some kind of a spaceship, and that it had a big round dashboard kind of like thing, a big area, and that it didn't have switches or dials or anything. And this was probably early 2000s, but it didn't have any kind of switches or dials. Everything was on these screens, and there wasn't information on the screens. The screens were round, and this being that was kind of like the captain or the head of this vehicle would simply pass his hand over it to control the vehicle, and that he was actually controlling it with his consciousness. Now, you have to understand that nowadays that doesn't sound so wild, but back then, especially for me, that was wild. I mean, that was like, what the heck am I looking at? This doesn't fit in with my belief system at all. So I called Lynn Buchanan, and I said, Lynn, I'm doing this operational target, and it's kind of causing some issues with my belief system. And he laughed, and he said, he didn't laugh, ha ha ha, but he chuckled, and he said, yeah, CRV will do that, he said, but Lori, think about it. He said, if the God that you have believed in all these years, if God is big enough to to oversee this planet and your life and all the people on the planet and all the beings, all the animals and everything, why would God only be interested in this planet? Why would God not be the God of the universe, and all the planets and all the beings? And it just had never struck me, believe it or not. People are going to be like, "Well, she was really dense," but I just hadn't thought that. Just had never thought. It had never occurred to me, and I just went, "Well, that's true. There doesn't need to really be a conflict here." And then gradually, as I did more and more targets that were really deep, esoteric targets, I have come to really understand things that were never part of my brain at all before. Things about, multiple universes, parallel dimensions, string theory, and how we're all connected. And so it's really been a life changer for me.
It sounds like it. And so going back to this experience that you had with the Kinross incident, you can use controlled remote viewing in different timelines, so it doesn't need to be a present moment timeline.
Exactly.
Incident or experiment.
Yeah, I have a fun story about that. I had a student that I was working with one-on-one, and she was high up in the Department of Homeland Security, and she had kind of grown up in Homeland Security in the prison system, working first as a guard and then eventually became a warden and then became like the head of a bunch of different prisons. She kind of moved her way up. And so she was taking the class from me, and on the third day of basic, and I teach 8 different 3-day workshops that build on each other: basic, intermediate, advanced, post-advanced. And I even have a free class for people to get to try out what CRV really is like before they spend any money. And I think you're going to be showing a URL of that for your listeners to have access to this free class. But the thing that really was so funny was that her target on the third day, and a target can be anything in all of time or space. But back in the old days, we used to cut pictures out of magazines and glue them onto paper and put them in an envelope. Nowadays, we have digital photos, and we don't have to do that anymore. But anyway, her picture was cut out of a National Geographic magazine, and it was a picture of probably like a 32-year-old Jane Goodall. Now, Jane Goodall is the ape lady, right? And she is now in her 80s. She's now in her 80s. But this was a photograph of her when she was about 32. She had light brown hair, very straight, parted, on the side, and it came down to a little below her shoulder. And she was kneeling in front of a chimpanzee. She was holding the chimpanzee's index finger with one hand. The other hand, she was offering the chimpanzee some food. And behind her, she was like in the forest, but behind her, there were 4 cylindrical poles set in a square with a canvas roof over that. And so she's described Jane Goodall to a T, including what she was wearing. She described the chimpanzee. She said, and this woman is holding something black, rubbery, and cylindrical, which was the index finger of the chimpanzee. She said her other hand is extended towards this black furry thing, and it seems to be holding some kind of food. And then she says, and behind the woman is a house. Now we teach in controlled remote viewing. Our mantra is describe, don't identify. We try to move viewers away from using nouns so consistently, because nouns will get you in trouble every time. So she says, the target is, she said behind this beings is a house. So I said, move into that which you perceive as a house and describe. So she said, oh, it has no walls, because this was just 4 poles with a roof, right? She said, oh, it has no walls. So I said, well, move up 5 feet and look down and describe. And because inside this thing was, inside these 4 poles with the roof, there was a picnic table with a tablecloth on it and a bunch of equipment, like electronic equipment. So she's essentially floating over the table mentally, and she says, I'm seeing a pattern, and I feel like it's linoleum, like a pattern on linoleum. And she draws this pattern. And so when we're done with the session and she's written up her report, and then she gets to see what she's been remote viewing, and she looks at the picture, and I expect her to get excited about how well she did describing Jane Goodall, but instead she goes, oh my gosh, look, I drew the pattern that's on the tablecloth. I drew the pattern exactly. And she starts kind of she goes, that means I was in that tent. I was in the tent. And I said, well, I don't want to freak you out anymore. But not only were you in the tent, but you were in the tent 50 years ago. She goes, oh my gosh. So yes, CRV is a time machine, and you can view things that happened in the past, and you can sometimes view things that happen in the future. Now, the future is not set, and sometimes a dear old friend of mine who was the first man ever inducted into the remote viewing unit that the U.S. military
Oh, wow.
formed, his name is Melvin C. Riley. Mel Riley and I became best friends, and Mel, he said, one time I was part of a project with a bunch of guys and we were trying to view the future, but the damn thing wouldn't stand still. So the problem, if you think of the future, Lynn has an analogy called the rock in the pond of time. If you think about, like, say you're a frog on a lily pad in the pond of time, and you look across the pond and you see a rock with a juicy bug that would make a great dinner. And so you want that bug. Actually, just the thought, just the act of looking at the bug can kind of scare the bug away. But sometimes the bug feels that he's being stared at and he flies away, right? But jumping into the pond to swim towards the bug will definitely create ripples that will scare the bug away. So you get to the rock and the bug is gone, but you saw that bug, right? But now the bug is gone, but the rock is still there. And the point of that analogy about remote viewing or psychically seeing the future is that there are rocks in the pond of time that seem to be unchangeable, but there might be the ones that get away. So if we use 9/11 as an example, when the two towers went down, right, in New York City, they had so many people who did not show up to work that day at the towers that they thought these people all must be part of a conspiracy. They must have known that something this was going to happen. And so they did a huge investigation, and they found that no, none of them knew. It was just a quote unquote coincidence that many people didn't show up to work that day. Well, I don't think it was a coincidence. I think that there are ripples through time that warn us about things. And that those people just, for whatever reason, it was just like, some of them had reasons that they didn't make it to work, whether, my kid got sick, or I woke up sick, or the subway broke down or whatever, and they couldn't get to work. But for a lot of people, it was just sort of like, oh, I don't feel like going to work today. I think I'm going to call in sick. So that's a rock in the pond of time. The people who didn't go to work that day were the bugs that got away. But the event itself might be a rock in the pond of time that could not be changed, even though many of us saw it. For years, I had nightmares about giant aircraft crashing into skyscrapers.
Oh, wow.
Some of my earliest dreams as a child, I would have these nightmares about these big planes crashing into these big towers. And when I was in September 10th, 2001, I was trying to leave New York. I had been in New York for several days, and I was leaving, and my plane couldn't get out. And finally, it left at 9:30 at night on September 10th. And I landed at DFW and had to stay in a hotel because there were no more flights to Amarillo, Texas, which is where I lived at the time. And so the next morning, I'm standing outside of TGF Fridays in the airport when I see the plane hit the towers. And I immediately went to a payphone and called a rental car place and said, I'm going to need a rental car to get to Amarillo, because I knew they would shut down the airports, and when I saw the second one hit, it was like, okay, this is definitely, they're going to shut down the airports. I went to a guy and said, I need to get my luggage because I'm not going to make it to Amarillo. I'm not going to get on the plane to Amarillo. So he said, okay. And he gave me my luggage. I rented a van. I said, who here is going to Amarillo? And I got a bunch of people to hop on the van with me, and we split the costs, and we went to Amarillo. Yeah. But the thing is that I feel like the years of remote viewing, the years of having seen the incident before it happened, and I never dreamt that again. I never had that nightmare again. But I think the years of that prepared me so that I was the first one to the phones. I was the first one saying, oh, it's terrorism, and when everyone else was just so in shock, they couldn't react. Everyone in the airport was just sort of, at that point, because this was like instantly, the minute that second plane hit, I ran to the phones. And then after I made that phone call and got the thing and everything, then all of a sudden people were reacting and lining up for the phones and lining up at the desk to get their luggage and things. So that's one reason we call controlled remote viewing a survival skill of the future. And the future's here. I mean, if you are able to be the first one to react in a crisis, how can that change the outcome for you and for those you love? If you can take action before anyone else, then it can really make a difference in your life.
Right, right. Well, and I think that you could apply this to so many different areas. I think you do like a medical viewing portion. I think I read lottery tickets on your website too, just but being able I've done it just really, somebody calls me and says, I lost something. Can you find it for me? And I'm just like, I'll try. That's not my main thing that I do, but I'll try. And then they call me back later and they're like, oh my gosh, you found the thing, you know? And, but you teach people to be able to do this in a very controlled way so that they're not, because when I'm doing it, I sometimes feel like I'm just reaching into that space.
Mhm. Yes.
And yeah.
Well, so many of us have spontaneous bursts of intuition. And so the idea behind controlled remote viewing is, what if you could actually control it? And I've had people say, well, I don't think we should try to control intuition. I'm like, well, why learn to drive your car? Why not just let your car go at once? It's like, well, I would crash into something. Exactly. Why we don't want the tail wagging the dog. There's absolutely nothing wrong with honing your skills to where you can direct them in a way that allows you to use them on demand, right? And so in thinking of it that way, when we have, like you said, you help this guy find his missing thing. One thing that I really feel distinguishes CRV from other types of intuition is that you can get amazing detail with CRV. So I was asked to participate in a research project where they wanted to see if remote viewers could see a microscopic thing, something that was microscopic.
Oh.
With the idea that in the future, remote viewers might be able to help with finding solutions to problems like antibiotic resistant bacteria.
Mhm.
It's threatening the human race, let's say. So this was way before COVID, by the way. And so the project was put on, and the idea was a microphage, which is a virus that eats antibiotic resistant bacteria. So this virus could potentially save humanity if we were overrun by bacteria that was antibiotic resistant. And so I ended up, I was blind to the target. I was told with us we have 7 categories that we kind of broad. We call them gestalts, but they're kind of broad categories or overall concepts. Things like the concept of land or the concept of water. Water is in many forms. Water is, a liquid, it is a gas, it is a vapor, it's ice, it's snow. There's so many different forms of water. And then also the idea of liquid, in addition to just water, liquid, like the wine in someone's glass or the sweat on someone's brow. So that's the overall concept that we call water. Then there's the concept of land, but it could be marshy land, hilly land, dry land, desert land, it doesn't matter what kind of land. But the concept of land itself is it's another overall concept. And so when we talk about biological, that means anything that is living or has had life. So I was told the target is biological, describe the target. So that could be a person, it could be, anything. And as I started working on the session and going through the procedure, it's a written procedure. You're sitting at a table with your eyes open. So I'm going through this written procedure and putting my thoughts down on the page in certain places and just letting free flow of consciousness. And my first thought when I thought biological is like, oh, trees and plants. So I go with whatever first thought comes in because I figure even if it's wrong, it eventually gets on track. So I started out describing trees and plants and things. And then all of a sudden I had this moment of impact that we refer to as the aesthetic impact. And the aesthetic impact for me usually gets me on target. And at this moment, I suddenly had this sort of experience or visual, like I was riding a twisting roller coaster that was all lit up. And it was kind of twisting off into the darkness. And I went, whoa, what was that? And then I went, oh, I think I was just riding a strand of DNA. And I
Cool.
And I just had this experience. I went, oh, I think I just wrote a strand of DNA. And that's when I went, oh my gosh, it's microscopic. And then I started really describing it. And then we take everything we get in the session and we write it up into a final report for the customer. And my final report ended up, I did it actually on an Excel spreadsheet in an outline format. So a lot of my students who are professional psychics and mediums and healers and things take controlled remote viewing because they want to be able to, for example, work with corporations. So they want to, they want to be able to do professional work and turn in professional science-based responses that will not get associated with the bad associations of like the neon palm in the window kind of a thing that a lot of people associate. Not that there's anything wrong with the neon palm in the window. I'm just saying a lot of people have negative connotations with quote unquote psychics or mediums or things because they just think it's really woo-woo, and but they really like the credibility that comes with anything that's science-based. So when the US military discovered that the Russians were getting our military secrets during the Cold War, they could not figure out how they were getting them. And then this man defected from Russia, and he had documents showing that Russia had a psychic spying program, and they were training soldiers to be psychic spies and spy on their enemies. And so they said, well, if they have it, we have to have it. So they went to Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto, California, and they spoke to two men who were brilliant physicists and who had participated in developing the laser, pioneering the development of the laser. So these guys were intelligent, Harold Puthoff and Russell Targ. So these two men started doing a lot of research into clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy, and they ended up doing so many controlled experiments that they actually developed more solid proof that telepathy, clairvoyance, all these things exist than that the FDA has, proving that aspirin is effective as a pain reliever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they have more proof. So, and when you have skeptics who say, it's just BS, I don't believe any of that. It's usually because if they did accept it, if they really took a look at it and even tried it themselves to see if, because that's the biggest convincer. If I do something, you might say, oh, that's a parlor trick. But if I teach you to do something and you do it yourself, you know that you're not defrauding yourself, right? That's why I created that free class, because there's nothing more convincing than doing it yourself. So when these guys came up with all this information, then the US military created a second arm of the unit so we have the research arm in Palo Alto, California. It's the secret think tank, Stanford Research Institute, known as SRI. And then on the East Coast in Maryland, in a bunch of condemned buildings, they had these soldiers who were spies and whose job was to be the remote viewers. So this was the applications arm where they actually did it. Right. So when Jimmy Carter was asked by a producer from the Travel Channel, they were doing a show called Secrets of, and every week it was Secrets of something else. Mm-hmm. And this one week it was Secrets of the White House. So I get this phone call from this producer from the Travel Channel, and she said, I just interviewed Jimmy Carter. And he said, when I asked him, what was the most, unusual thing from your presidency or something like that, he said, when the remote viewers found the missing Russian plane. And so she said, can you tell me more about this missing Russian plane thing? Excuse me. So what we did was we had a three-way call with Lynn Buchanan and Mel Riley and the producer and I, so that I guess that's a four-way call. And so she could ask them about the whole session with the Russian plane. Hold on just a second.
Okay.
Anyway, so I thought that was very interesting, just this, that even the President Carter, that was fascinating. What happened was the Russians had this plane that was full of technology, and it went down and no one knew where it was, including the Russians. So it was a big scramble to find the plane because the US wanted their technology and wanted to, see where the technology was. So the US hoped we find the plane first, right? So they asked this group of remote viewers to tell them where the plane was. They gave them GPS coordinates, and the guys were like, there's no way the plane could be here. So they didn't even go look. But coincidentally, something happened very close to those GPS coordinates the very next day, and they had to go there anyway. And then they found the plane.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, so then they were like, "Oh my gosh, the remote viewers were right. They gave us the GPS coordinates." We had the distinction and the honor of doing a very large, heavily mounted project. I say heavily because we had 14 viewers and 4 project managers. It was a large project, and it was for an archaeologist who had spent 40 years of his life looking for these artifacts that he believed to be in this 200 square mile area of ocean. And his belief was that since that area of ocean has been covered by water for 18,000 years, what if prior to those 18,000 years, what if there was a pre-Adamic society living there? Then we should be able to find remnants of that civilization. So he spent 40 years of his life with divers and boats and all kinds of expense trying to find these artifacts. So he came to a conference that I was presenting at, and he approached me and said, "Well, what do you think if we try to find these things using remote viewers?" He said, "I've worked with remote viewers before." I knew that he hadn't. I think he'd probably worked with psychics, but there really is a difference because as I was telling you about the research project for the microphage, I
Right.
ended up turning in a report that had close to 200 perceptions. And the guys running the research project gave that report to 4 scientists who were experts in microphages. They knew nothing about remote viewing. They were experts in microphages. And they said, "Could you just score this Excel spreadsheet that's an outline and score it for which perceptions here, or what words relate to the microphage and are correct and what are incorrect?" And all 4 of them scored it with 98% accuracy. That my perceptions have been 98% accurate. But think about 200 perceptions versus 2 sentences about something.
Oh
That
yeah, totally.
that's one of the differences, is that the methodology and the process allows you to get these perceptions that you can database them, you can categorize them, colors, textures, temperatures, smells, sounds, tastes, sizes, shapes, patterns, positions, measures, concepts like political, touristy, fun, things that are intangible. And so it's not just the sketches or a sentence or two. These are full on reports. So when he got his report from 14 viewers, it was a book, with a table of contents and everything. And when he got it, he called me, he said, "I've never worked with remote viewers." Oh my gosh, I've never worked with remote viewers. But it was, anyway, back to where was I before? I was talking about something else. I forgot my place now.
Well, I think first you were talking about, yeah, just the difference between, how some people think it's really woo woo and they don't really actually consider how distinctive controlled remote viewing is from something like I get, where I'm not controlling it and I'm not in control of it because I'm just, kind of, I haven't learned it. I got your book, the Boundless book, and I started working with the exercises in there. But when you're actually controlling this and you're dropping yourself into this and you have this understanding of what you're supposed to be doing there, instead of just kind of reaching around in the dark kind of thing, that's a complete different
Really is. It's very
experience.
so it's almost like it's a directed process
Mhm.
that where and the process itself, the structure of it is what helps you get information in a very controlled way. So if for example, if you were to help somebody just off the cuff find their glasses and you said, "Yeah, I'm seeing your glasses in a room and there's these gray boxy like things and there's 2 of them close together and the glasses seem to be between them on the floor in a kind of a dark space," right? Well, the person's going, "Oh gosh, in my office I have those filing cabinets." And they run into the office and they reach down between them and there's the glasses that have fallen, to between the filing cabinets. So that's an example of just straight up intuition. People have that kind of thing happen, and a lot of people who are trained as psychics and mediums can have that happen, and it's really cool when that happens. I mean, it's like, yeah, I'm glad I helped you out, right? And so generally, that we don't want to kill a flea with a hammer, right? We right? So
Right.
when it's something simple, we don't need a CRV session. You don't need a huge session. Um, But the thing about a CRV session is CRV is great when you need a lot of detail. So let's say, for example, if we had a kidnapped child and the police needed to know where's the child being kept. If you were to say, well, let's see, it's in a town with a library and a post office and a grocery store, and you were to talk like that. Hold on just a second. I think I have to.
Bless you.
Thank you. Lots of allergies going around with the
Oh,
beautiful weather we're having. Anyway, so if you were to say, well, it's in a town with a library and a grocery store and a post office, every town has that, right? Every town in the world has that. So that wouldn't be very helpful, right? It's like telling the police in New York that it's near a donut shop, How many donuts
right.
are there in New York? And so what we have to do instead, we have to give enough detail and a detailed description that they can really find it, in a city like New York. So with CRV, what we can do is we can give enough detail and a really good description. And we can also use some techniques that we have. Everything is very hands-on and very kinesthetic because we believe that the science behind this is that the conscious is kind of the driver of the car and is sort of driving the car, but the car is owned and truly operated by the computer that is really making all the systems work. And so if you think of for example, the difference between the driver of the car and Elon Musk and the Tesla, the Tesla is like a big computer, right? It's driving down the street. It's like your body. Your body's a computer. There's a gazillion processes happening in your body. So your conscious mind is really just 0.001% of who you are. Your subconscious mind is the thing that's really, it's like the Elon Musk of your body. It's the thing that understands all the systems and really works through the body, but can also talk to the conscious mind. But it can only talk through the body. The body is the link between conscious and subconscious. So we also assume that the subconscious mind is connected to everything that ever is or was or will be, through whether it's plugged into the great big cosmic database in the sky, whether it's tapping into the Akashic records, whether it's speaking to spirit guides or angels, whether it just has a direct line to God, or whether there's some part of reality that we have absolutely no concept of that allows us to be so interconnected that we're able to pick up anything from all of time and space. We don't really know what the mechanism is.
Right. Now, are 100% of the people that you train who take this class able to do the controlled remote viewing?
I've never had anybody that couldn't do it. And I know that whenever a student asks me that, they're thinking about taking the class, they say, is there, have you ever had anybody that can't do it? I'm like, never had anybody. They're thinking, I'll be the first one.
Right.
I'll be the first one that she can't teach, But I've never had anybody. I mean, it's a hilarious thing is when, for example, a wife gets excited about remote viewing and wants to take the course. Her husband's afraid that maybe she's getting into a cult or something weird. So he comes and takes the class too to see what's my wife getting into, right? And I've had these husbands come and take the course, and a lot of times they're engineers. They have a real left brain job that involves a lot of numbers or whatever. And it's really hilarious when the husbands actually score higher than the wives on their sessions. And the wives get really mad, like, he doesn't even care about this. I care, A lot of times the caring is what actually kind of keeps them from being as successful, because they're like, I'm just so afraid I'll be wrong. I want to be right so bad. And then they edit. They go, well, I was going to write this down, but I was like, I was going to write this down, but it might be wrong, so I better not write it down. And so because they have that going on, well, they can't, if you have that on, you edit too much and you end up being wrong. Another thing too, is we have the problem of the conscious mind in the beginning playing tug of war with the subconscious. So I'll give you an example. I have a picture in an envelope and I say, Sue, can you describe what's in this envelope? And you say, well, it's red, smooth, and shiny. I think it's an apple. And we open the envelope and it's a fire engine, a red fire engine. Well, they're both red, smooth, and shiny, but there's a big difference between an apple and a fire engine, right? And so what happens when we do something like this is the conscious mind is the one going, I bet it's an apple. I bet it's an apple. And the subconscious is trying to send you information about the target. And
Right.
but the conscious mind wants to be the boss, wants to be in charge, wants to be helpful. Let me give you, let me help you. And so that's what even gets in the way of psychics a lot of times. Just it's the jumping to conclusions. I once watched Psychic Detectives. I think it was something on the Travel Channel many years ago, like 2004. My son came over and goes, "Mom, have you heard of the show Psychic Detective? Let's watch it. It's coming on right now." So we watched it. And in the show, this medium was tuning in. There was a murder victim, and the medium was tuning into who killed the victim. And she said the victim was killed by a man who works in something mechanical that revolves like a merry-go-round. So they start checking out all the carnivals nearby, all the amusement parks nearby. They go on this wild goose chase, and when they finally do catch the guy, it turns out he was driving a cement truck, which is a mechanical thing that revolves. But the minute she attached that noun to it, that merry-go-round, she just said like a merry-go-round, but that's still attaching a noun. It sent them off on this wild goose chase.
Well, that would be like, there has to be then a balance between giving enough information for something to be discovered and to give those like unique characteristics, and then leaving it broad enough, like you said, where you didn't assign that merry-go-round or the carnival feeling to it, unless they said it's a fun place, there's lots of people there. So so the difference between it's a solitary person, there's not many people there, it doesn't seem fun, kind
Right.
of.
And the key really is the balance is leave out the nouns and stick to describing. Just stick to describing. But the thing about it is that nouns are a natural part of the process. They're going to pop in your mind. You can't fight them. It's like, don't think about elephants. Don't think about elephants. And so, you can't fight it. So we teach you this process where you actually have kind of a dance going on between the conscious and subconscious mind. And we have an analogy that we call the president of the company analogy. And that analogy is that imagine that you're the president of your company, and the CEO comes and says, "Sue, I want you to take a 2-week vacation. We want someone else to run the company while you're gone." Well, the first thing your ego goes, "Wait a minute, this is my baby. Who's going to run the company when I'm gone?" So they send you off to Bermuda. You're on the beach. And what are you doing? You're constantly checking in. Oh, but before you leave, they say, "Don't worry, Sue. We're going to have your son run the company." And so, then you're really conflicted because you want your son to do well, but at the same time, you don't want him to make you look bad, right? You don't want him to do so good that he makes you look bad, and you don't want him to screw things up either. So while you're on the beach in Bermuda, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be checking in constantly. "How's it going, son? What's going on? Tell me what's happening. Hey, Mom, I came up with this great idea that I want to do for the company." And you're like, "Well, hold off on that till I get back." Right? You're not going to let the son run the company. And the son in this analogy is the subconscious mind. And so, the subconscious mind doesn't get a chance to do its job. So what you have to do is you have to bring Sue back from Bermuda and put her out down at the dock stacking boxes and get her really busy with a job. So she has to stay out of the way. So that's what the structure of CRV is designed to do. It gives the conscious mind a job to do. So that conscious mind can feel honored and taken care of, but also kept out of the way so that the subconscious mind can come in and really do its thing.
That makes sense too, because like you were saying, the conscious mind wants to specify where the subconscious mind might be able to give you enough information specifically to the thing without shifting it in that way. I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you have a class coming up too, don't you? Like on October 14th?
Yes, I have a basic class coming up, and it's pretty exciting because I believe this is going to be only the 5th time that we're opening enrollment to a program that we don't even advertise, that only certain people are allowed, very, very few people can get into. So people are like, how come you don't have this on your website? Well, because we reached capacity so quickly the first time we enrolled people into it We've opened enrollment only 4 times because we just keep running at capacity and we can't invite more people in. But the basic class is a 3-day, we call it the 3-day fast track program. And that class, I have like 4 times a year. I offer it 3 or 4 times a year usually. And that's the best class for beginners. And on the second day of that class, we tell the class about our coaching program. It's a 3-year professional certification program. Now,
Oh, wow.
it took me many, many years before I really considered myself to have reached the pinnacle of my remote viewing, if there is such a thing, to become kind of in the world-class category of a remote viewer. And I don't mean to say that to brag. I just mean it based on all the viewers that I've seen and how we've worked together. And there's just sort of a caliber of viewer that we consider to be like world-class level. But it takes a long time to get there and so much practice, right? But I thought to myself, well, the programs I developed, because we have a 5-tier membership club. We have 3-day live classes. We have video courses for people who can't take a live class. We have now we have this coaching program. And the idea was, I always think, what would I have loved to have had when I was learning this? Because it can be a really lonely journey and quite a struggle if you're by yourself and you don't have support. So I wanted the membership club, which is essentially a mentoring club where, like I used to charge $500 an hour. This was way back in the early 2000s. I charged $500 an hour to mentor you for 1 hour, for example, one-on-one mentoring for 1 hour. And then I thought, this is a waste of my time because I could be mentoring 50 people for that hour.
Right.
It's one person. So I created this club. It costs $49 a month, and when you buy the first class, you get it for free for 2 months. And so, you're in this mentoring club where you get an assignment, and then I'm literally online with you going over your session, and it's costing you it costs $49 a month. And as you go up into intermediate and advanced levels, you still get to keep attending the meetings for the lower levels. So altogether, by the time you're in advanced, you're still paying $49 a month, but you're getting an extra the 12 hours of learning, of teaching every month, 8 to 12
That's
hours.
generous.
Yeah. And that includes me going over your sessions and, helping you with your structure and all that kind of thing. So what my goal was to have the most robust school that exists right now. And I am the teacher that teaches more students than any other teacher on the planet, more often, more students more often, and overall have taught more. But my goal, my passion is that more people learn. We got to reach the 1%, right? So we can have critical mass and raise consciousness. So my goal is to create a very loving community, which we have. We have a non-Facebook based forum. We do have a Facebook group called Remote Viewing with Lori Williams. That's just a public group that anybody can join. But we have also this wonderful private forum. So, and each one is designed in a level. That's why I say it's a 5-tier membership, because, the basic group has their group, and you can ask questions in there, and you're answering your questions. You can find partners to partner up with and make friends and all that kind of stuff in a non-Facebook based forum that's private, that's just in our company. And we have that for each group: intermediate, advanced, the post-advanced groups, the professional groups, the medical applications group, and the operational remote viewers, which are the professionals. So when my thought was, what if people could get on a track where they had a coach that would coach them for an hour a week, one-on-one, a real professional remote viewer coaching you for an hour a week, what would that do? How much faster would people progress? Because I thought, man, if I could have, like in a perfect world, if I could have had whatever I wanted while I was developing, to have my own one-on-one coach that I could reach out to anytime I had a question or whatever, oh my gosh, that would have made such a difference. I would have progressed so much faster. And I think I would have reached a level of excellence much sooner, and because sometimes this can be such a frustrating journey for, and any kind of really intense martial art is a frustrating journey, and so that's what CRV is. It's a mental martial art.
Right. Now, just because you said that, and thinking about like times when I'm really working heavily, is it exhausting?
With CRV, is CRV exhausting?
Yeah.
It depends. Different people react differently, and we also find there's many, many factors that affect a viewer's performance at any given time on any given session. Let's say
Right.
that you had a boyfriend that used to beat you up and was cruel to you, and that's kind of a thorn in your past that's sort of traumatic for you. If you had a target that had a person in it that reminded you of him on a subconscious
Mhm.
level, you might not want to view that target. So you might start the session and go, man, I just don't feel like viewing right now. And I feel exhausted trying to view this. And you wouldn't even know that that's the reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Or
totally.
yeah, or if you hate the sight of blood and there's blood at the target, or there can be so many factors. How much sleep you got last night. And so what we encourage viewers to do is to always document when they start their session what their circumstances are. Like, I just had lunch, I just did a workout, I just meditated, I just went for a walk, I just took a bath, whatever they just did. And that way, after you do hundreds of sessions or even just 40, you can look through your sessions and go, oh, the ones that I had the highest score that I had were the most accurate. The majority of those were right after a workout, let's say. Then you know that your best work is to do right after a workout. We also have you write your location, because you might find out that there's a certain room in your house that you do better work than if you do it somewhere else.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense.
We
Yeah.
even have a database for all this stuff, so that for the students, for my students, it's free. Whoever goes in there, they can put their stuff in the database, and that way they can say, wow, I am like 98% accurate when it comes to colors, but I totally suck at man-made objects, let's say. Or I'm really, really good when I view out in the driveway in the motorhome, as opposed to viewing in my living room, or whatever. And you also find what your weaknesses are. I discovered that I had a really bad fear of heights that I didn't even really consciously recognize until every time there was a target involving heights, I would just kind of like, I just can't do this. And finally, Lynn said, do you have a problem with heights? And I suddenly had all these memories pop up from my childhood of where I really had a problem with heights. So I said, yeah, I really do. So he started just having me view height targets a lot, and I became desensitized. And since I became desensitized, I have done bungee jumping, I've gone parasailing, I've
Oh,
ridden
wow.
the highest roller coasters in the world all day long, and so it's really helpful for getting over phobias and things like that, so CRV has a lot of wonderful benefits to it that you just wouldn't necessarily consider. Help me get rid of a ton of fears in my life as well. So that's, that alone is worth the price of gold.
Right, right. I'm all in. So, yeah. And it just sounds fascinating. It's opening yourself up to a skill set that's a latent skill set that a lot of people have. And like you said, that 1%, and it can help you make decisions. It can help you, like with you on the 10th of September, it can help you have the foresight to be able to react to situations as they're occurring, because you already have some nuggets of useful information that you can use to guide you. So it sounds like win, 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 win all the way around. And you can make a profession out of it.
Exactly. And one of the things, is that CRV is kind of the basket that holds other types of remote viewing skills. The term remote viewing is like the term martial arts. It's like, that's really generic. Like if you say, I'm a 10th degree black belt in martial arts, you never hear anyone say that. They'll be like, I'm a
Right.
10th degree black belt in taekwondo, or I'm a 10th degree black belt in karate, but they don't just, say martial arts, because that's just too generic of a term. Well, the same thing with remote viewing. As soon as this thing became declassified in 1995, it was all in, it was on Larry King Live and 60 Minutes in 2020, and it was all over the news. The U.S. military used psychics, and so
Right.
when that happened, all of a sudden everybody was saying, "Oh, I'm a remote viewer. I've been a remote viewer my whole life." I get letters all the time from people saying, "Oh, I've been a remote viewer my whole life," and that is probably true in the generic sense of the term. What is remote viewing? It's any kind of psychic ability. Truly, people would call in and say, "Well, I'm a crystal ball remote viewer, or I'm a palm reading remote viewer, or I'm a tarot remote viewer." So they were attaching the term remote viewing to everything they were doing. And I think the idea was to add credibility, really,
Right.
And so I teach three different types of remote viewing. I teach controlled remote viewing, which is the father of remote viewing, in that it holds, it's like the basket, it's like that organizer in your junk drawer. You buy a drawer organizer to organize the junk, so that you have a little cubicle for your rubber bands and a little cubicle for your paper clips and that half-used tubes of super glue, whatever. And so it can hold, and you can do all the other methods within that. You can even do tarot, crystal ball reading, whatever you do, you can do it within the structure of CRV. And when we actually teach that in the advanced class, how if you're really good at some other type of modality, psychometry or whatever, you can actually take your results and put them into the structure of CRV and make it scoreable and databaseable, so that you can find your weaknesses and strengths. So you can strengthen your weaknesses and utilize your strengths when there's push comes to shove, there's a life at stake. Let's use the person who in the database has the best ability to get this type of information that we need. So
Right.
it's so there's a science to it. There's an organization to it, which really helps. Again, like when if you're going to become a sharpshooter, you wouldn't consider it unusual to take training to learn how to be a sharpshooter. And
Right.
because you don't want to just go shooting willy-nilly. You might hurt somebody, including yourself, right? So you want to be able to hit the target when you shoot. And so whether it's
Right.
bullets or arrows or whatever. And so in that sense, that's what we're going for with CRV. That's why we have a database. We want this to be something that is truly aimed at helping people and can be used, for good. Find that missing child. Help that archaeologist find. I don't think I ever gave the punchline that we were able to give this archaeologist in this report GPS coordinates. He took a boat, divers out there, and found the artifacts, found walls, archways, things with inscriptions on them. He found the civilization that he had been looking for 40 years. But
Wow.
it took remote viewers to provide him with that information, because we were able to give him GPS coordinates. And so that's the thing. And it's not an exact science. We make plenty of mistakes. We're not always perfect. We definitely have, sometimes we're off. Every viewer does. Like I said, many factors can affect that. How much sleep you got, what the subject matter is of the target you're viewing. So that is all taken into consideration when we do this training. And so I'm teaching a new basic class October 14th through 18th. The last time I taught basic was actually this year's been kind of sparse, because I think the last time I taught basic was in March or February. So it's been a while.
Oh,
So I'm teaching a live class on Zoom, the 14th through the 16th, and it starts at 9 in the morning Mountain Time. I'm on Mountain Time, and goes till 5 p.m., 4 or 5 p.m., depending. And so it's a full class, and they always sell out. But then on Saturday, so we teach Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but on Saturday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time is when I'm going to be offering people the opportunity to join a program that's a 3-year, very intensive program. So it's not for everybody, and it's not cheap. It's very expensive.
right. I can imagine. Yeah.
You can imagine, I mean, these are skilled coaches that I have that have spent many years of their lives and much money becoming world-class remote viewers. So, and then they've gone through my coaching program and everything. So in order to be able to coach people, these are highly skilled people, and I can't pay them a pittance, especially, I mean, some of them have high paid professional jobs in addition to coaching. So imagine they're spending an hour a week, and not only that's just the time they're spending with you. That doesn't include the time where they're preparing things for you, getting ready and to assign you stuff and work with you, and emails going back and forth and all that. So having a one-on-one coach is, wow, it's like the cat's meow.
Oh, I can imagine because, even for myself in all of the courses and everything that I've took, usually there's not a mentor who kind of walks us through the processes and everything. And it's just kind of, I don't want to say generic and basic, but more basic than generic, more, self-study. And if you want to improve your work, you're not really given, kind of directed mentorship in a way that I would think, and I'm just like going back to the love of it being scientifically logged and tracked and databases being created and things like that, because I feel like we're in that space right now where that's an important
Mhm,
aspect of the work that we do moving forward, is to
mhm,
have that scientific, or that like provable part of it, that documented part of it, that part of
mhm.
it that's like, this was real. It's not just a hallucination or a hoax or a a lucky call, a lucky guess.
Exactly, exactly. That's so important. And so we're coming to a time, I think, on the planet right now where science is starting to kind of be more accepting of the mysteries, the great mysteries that we face and they're beginning to realize when certain experiments prove that there are parallel universes, which it's happened, right? They have proved parallel universes now through some of their experimentation. Quantum theory, many aspects of quantum theory are now being proven. And so scientists are getting, some scientists that are realizing this. There are some who just refuse to even accept the proof. Some of Einstein's things about Einstein thought the speed of light is the fastest speed anything could go. Well, now they've got things that go faster than the speed of light. So they blew that out of the window, right? And so that upset the apple cart for a lot of physicists who were like, now what do we do? Things that we thought were true are no longer true. So how do we handle that? How do we, what do we do with having our paradigms blown to smithereens? And so I think what's happening is those, back, I'm sure you're aware, back in the 1800s, there was spiritism, right? There was seances and table tipping and all that. And there was a big movement at the turn of the century, around 1900, a big movement where everybody was really into spiritism. At the same time, in the back in the old days when they discovered germs, and they said, "Oh, my
Right.
God, we believe." If before they actually had proof, they said, "We believe there might be microscopic, unseeable things that could be causing people to get sick. It could be killing women when doctors deliver the babies, and doctors need to start washing their hands before they do surgery." And they got hooted out. A lot of them had their careers destroyed, and they were made fun of. Oh, little things we can't see. They were totally hooted and laughed out of their careers. And it turned out they were right, like Galileo. So science has always had to face those who defied current belief systems, because a lot of science is based on belief. It's based
Yeah.
on circumstantial evidence that turns out not to be true. And we don't even know what reality is. I think reality is not at all what we think it is. And so as these things are happening, though, I'm seeing I have a lot of scientists among my students. In fact, my husband is a forensic scientist. He's a retired forensic
Oh, wow,
scientist.
cool.
Yeah. So, and he met me, he had never heard of CRV. When he met me, he went and took all the classes, and he is just, he's a firm believer in it all. And I love his belief in me, because there have been times I was working on a kidnapping, and I got the name of the place where this kidnap victim was being held. It was near this town in a foreign country. And I drew schematics of what the layout looked like and all these things. But we couldn't find it on Google Earth. We were looking and looking, trying to find it. We couldn't find it on Google Earth. And I wanted to give them coordinates, but I couldn't because it wasn't coming up right. So the next day, my husband comes home from work and he says, "I found it. I found it." I'm like, "You found what?" He said, "I found blank, blank, the name of the village." And he said, and he had this map, like a physical map. And he opens this map, and it's a map of this country, like an amazing detailed map. And I said, "Where did you find this map?" He said, "Well, if you said it existed, I knew it had to be there. So I went to a specialty
Oh,
map shop and I bought this map." And then we found it and we went on Google Earth, and then we were able to give them the coordinates, and everything I had sketched was right there when we pulled it up on Google Earth. You know how in Google Earth you can get really close up, and we were able
right.
to give them the coordinates and everything, and that's where this guy had been being held, this kidnap victim. But it was really, it just kind of amazes me how the whole process works. In another session, I was supposed to find the reason for this airplane crash. And I didn't know, I wasn't told it was an airplane crash. I didn't know what I was looking at. But when I was doing the session, I said, there's something failing. And my husband, who has now been trained to be a world-class remote viewing monitor, said, move to the failing and describe. So I said, well, it's, I'm Italian. I'm like, well, it's kind of like, I'm moving my hands around. He says, could you sketch that for me? And I said, well, I'm not a mechanic, but I'll try. So I sketched this thing, and I actually sketched the bearings on the inside of this airplane engine. And I didn't know what I was sketching. I didn't know what it was at all. But my husband's dad was an airplane mechanic in the 50s, and this was an airplane from the 50s. This crash actually happened in the 1950s. And so he's like, oh my gosh, like, he didn't say anything at the time because the monitor's job is to be stone-faced. But much, much later, once I was given feedback and knew what I'd been viewing, he was like, that's like one of the best sessions you've ever done. And you completely sketched this. And then we were able to get a photo of the actual airplane engine. And it was so uncannily accurate.
Wow.
But what do I know about airplane engines? Zero. So to be able to describe, not to identify, because if I were trying to identify it, I can't, because I know nothing about that. So I would probably identify it incorrectly if I tried to name it or label it.
Right.
Whereas if you just stick to describing, then you can be highly accurate even when you know nothing about whatever it is you're talking about.
Right, right. And you just described too this wonderful, just the awe of being able to get into that place and to be able to pick up that much detail so that somebody who's a mechanic and who's familiar with that would be able to say, gosh, you you drew that pretty accurately. So,
Yeah, it all, that's the thing too, is people go, how, my kids particularly, one of my sons was like, how can you still be so excited, especially when you're teaching basic? You've been teaching basic now for 22 years. How do you still get so excited about it? When it's the same thing over and over. And I said, because I never lose that sense of amazement and wonder at how it works. And when you see a new student, doing it for themselves for the first time and they nail the target, they're just so excited. They just sort of float out of the room after that. They're just walking on air. They're so excited to discover their own potential.
yeah.
For some people, it freaks them out. We had one person who was a scientist, female. She did a target and nailed it so accurately and described, I think it was these guys in orange safety vests who were digging a car out of the snow, was the photo. And she described those guys, their coats, the snow, the car, the shovels, everything. She described it so accurately. And afterwards she said, I described it so accurately that it freaks me out. It's like busting all my paradigms.
Right, right. Well, yeah, and it's probably something to definitely get used to. Like you have to process it internally because it is a mystery. But it is, yeah. And yeah, and I'm like, I could talk to you about this forever because it's probably also the universe conspiring to put everything together, because how would you have known it was a plane engine unless your father-in-law, who was familiar with that kind of plane engine, was there to actually view the thing that you had seen? So there are
he wasn't there, but my husband, who
okay.
grew up with his dad, said, later he said, those are the bearings inside the engine. You drew the bearings and the whole kit, the whole attachment of the bearings and how they were inside the engine and everything. I drew it from several different angles. I made a whole bunch of schematics of it. And I'm not an artist, but somehow these sketches they ended up being really good. I mean,
right.
Every now and then you strike gold, But anyway, so it's been a wonderful journey. I'm so thrilled to be able to share all this with you and your listeners. I don't know how many listeners you have, but I hope they've enjoyed it, and I hope they check out the free class. One thing I want to say, because a lot of people go, oh my God, it's going to be a sales pitch, right? Because we all have been hit with that. When I created the free class, I thought one thing I'm not going to do is do what irritates the heck out of me, is to try to check out something that says it's free and then find out it's nothing but a sales pitch. This is not a sales pitch. This is it's at least 4 hours. I think it's 8 hours maybe. What it is it's 4 parts. You get an email after you sign up for the free class. the next day, you don't get it immediately, but the next day you get an email with a link, and you click on the link and it takes you to your first lesson, which is, I think, 40 minutes to an hour long. I don't remember. It's a video of me teaching. And then after that, there's a Q&A that is it was live originally, but it's now recorded. You can either watch the Q&A or not watch it. You don't have to. It's not part of the class, but you can have it. It's an extra thing. And then the next day you get another email with a new link and you can watch that. So you have 10 days to watch at your convenience, because people will write and go, oh no, I'm going to be working when it comes in, because it says something like, this will appear at 9 a.m. in your inbox. And they'll go,
Right.
well, I'm at work. It doesn't matter. You get to have access to it for like 10 or 12 days. To access at your convenience. You can watch it at 3 a.m. if you want, whenever you want. And so it'll come in, it comes in for 4 days. And the last day, on the very last day, I'll say, hey, if this is something if this really resonates with you and you feel like it is for you, because I find the people that take CRV feel called to it. They have a. So I don't want people who don't have a calling. I don't want people who say, oh, I don't want to do that. I want the people who really feel called to it so that we can help them. And so I'm like, hey, if I'm not a salesperson, I'm a teacher. If this resonates with you and you would like to take something a little more, and then I make them an offer where they can get $300 off on the 6-week course. So.
Definitely.
And so that's the only sales pitch. It's at the very end of the class, and it's like 1 sentence long. So.
Well, and like you said, I think that it's a calling for a lot of people. And if they're to the point where they're interested in and they watch all of the classes and everything, you also have a book that I bought on Amazon, the Boundless Phase 1. And I think you have more than one book on Amazon. Like I think there's
right now I have 2 books on Amazon. The third book is something I'm working on right now. So Boundless Phase 1 is talking about it. I really wanted to write a book that anyone would understand and find entertaining. And really, my goal as a teacher is to make learning fun and easy to remember. So, I put in stories and things like that because my students generally tell me that the stories help them remember the concept. So because I've seen some remote viewing books that were this thick, and you needed a magnifying glass to read the print because the print was so small. And I was just like, I would never make it through a tome like that. So I decided to write a book on each phase of the 6-phase process. And but the first book I published was really just for my students, and it's called Monitoring. And it's the only book that's ever been written on remote viewing monitoring. But on the cover of the book, I explain on the back cover how Edgar Casey, for example, he had someone there who was taking notes and kind of his support person in addition to his wife. And that's what a monitor is, really. And so it has some great tips for both monitors and for intuitive teams that are not remote viewers, but work together as psychic teams or whatever, and how a psychic could have a helper that without leading them or giving them information, but that just is there to be supportive. Like, do you need a break? Would you like some water? Are you getting cold? Can I turn up the thermostat? Anything like that. Plus, just kind of asking questions like my husband, like when I said something's failing and he said, move to the failing and describe, or if I say, well, somehow this biological thing is related to the man-made thing in some way, we'll move to the relationship between the biological and the man-made and describe, so that's what the monitor's job is, to kind of help the viewer stay in structure and move around the target to explore all aspects of it without giving any information. Because usually the monitor doesn't know anyway. The monitor doesn't know any information. So.
Right. That makes sense. And that also really makes a lot of sense, to have somebody who is aware enough to be able to lead you to that connection point as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So everybody, Lori Lambert Williams, she is doing a course. The basic course starts on October 14th, but you can check out her website, intuitivespecialist.com. And I think that your free course is there as well. Your book's on Amazon. It's called Boundless. That's what I'm reading now, and I'm starting with that. And so, Lori, thank you so much for taking time today and meeting with us and really sharing so much about controlled remote viewing. It's been fascinating.
Oh, Sue, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be here. And this is live, right? This is happening right now?
This is happening right now, and then there will be a replay on YouTube. So if anybody missed anything or they want to, it'll be up on YouTube forever or as long as YouTube is there. So yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, very nice talking with you. So everybody, again, Lori Lambert Williams, and you can find her at intuitivespecialist.com. And yeah, my mom says, awesome. Thank you. So she was with us today. So
Hi, Sue's mom.
so thank you so much again. And everybody, thanks for joining us. We hope you found it as fascinating as I did. So take care and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.